Welcome to Morningstar. Today I talk to Ronald van Genderen, Senior Manager Research Analyst at Morningstar, about his new ESG paper. And in that paper he addresses the issue that many investors have already switched from conventional portfolios to a sustainable one, but there are still a lot of investors who are in doubt. And instead of debunking that doubt, Ronald is investigating into it, what the causes are. So Ronald, can you elaborate a bit more on how you have set up the analysis of your research into the biases that come along with sustainable investing?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Robert. So in our study, we looked at 4 different exposures: size, style, sector, and regional allocations. And we examined funds across 4 core building blocks of the equity portion of a portfolio, being Europe Large Cap Blend Equity, Global Emerging Markets Equity, Global Large Cap Blend Equity, and US Large Cap Blend Equity Morningstar categories. And we divided funds into conventional and sustainable strategies. And also, we distinguished between active and passive strategies because investors often choose between these 2 types of investments. And the exposures of them are driven by different factors. So eventually, we ended up with 4 peer groups within each of the 4 categories.
Now, sustainable strategies are often associated with a growth bias. How can you elaborate on that based on your study? Is that the case?
Yeah, so the first factors that we looked at were actually the size and the style exposure. And let's start with size exposure. So on this slide, we show the size exposure of the funds in the 4 peer groups. And we use box and whisker plots. So with the red dots representing the median exposures, and the category benchmarks are represented by the red lines. Meanwhile, the distributions of the size exposures are shown with the boxes representing the median 50% of the observations, and the whiskers representing the 10th and the 19th percentiles. So it shows that active sustainable strategies, which are displayed in the left chart, have medians that are well aligned with conventional peers. But the distributions show a slight bias away from larger caps compared to conventional strategies. And investors should also note that passive sustainable funds, which are displayed in the right chart, have a much greater diversity of size exposures compared to conventional strategies. And also these are skewed toward smaller caps, particularly for European and global equity funds. So if we then turn to style exposure, we see that both active conventional and sustainable active funds have higher value growth score, hence are growthier compared to the category benchmark, except for the US equity market where this is already a growth-oriented market. And for European and global equity funds, we found that especially within the style agnostic emerging market equity category, we found a bias towards the growth style among sustainable strategies, which was based on both median exposures, but also on the distribution of the value growth scores. And then finally, the sustainable index tracking options tend to favor growth companies over their conventional peers. And this is evident in the distribution of value growth scores across all 4 categories. About 3/4 of sustainable strategies have a value growth score that is higher than the median conventional strategy. In addition, the median European and global sustainable equity strategies also have portfolios that are significantly more growth-oriented than their respective category benchmarks. And therefore, when selecting a passive sustainable strategy, investors should be aware that it is likely to have a growth bias.
Okay, and then in terms of sector allocation, I guess sustainable funds are underweight in the energy sector, or not?
Yes, absolutely. That is exactly what we found. So it is clear when we look at the median exposures as shown in the charts on these slides. So active sustainable European equity funds still have some allocation to the sector, but most funds, for example, in the emerging markets and global large cap categories, tend to have no energy exposure at all. And meanwhile, passive sustainable strategies have some allocation to the sector, but at consistently lower levels compared to their conventional peers. So meanwhile, Also, active sustainable strategies show a consistent preference for healthcare stocks, and these weights are higher than the benchmark and conventional peers. Although this excludes the European large cap blend equity, where we haven't found that bias. Also, to a lesser extent, but still, we found the healthcare bias among passive sustainable funds, and particularly in European equity funds. So quite contrary to the findings among active sustainable funds. And then finally, technology stocks are another favorite for sustainable strategies, both active and passive. Surprisingly, on average, sustainable strategies appear to be even more invested in the sector than their conventional peers and relevant benchmarks. And this tilt contributes to sector concentration risk, particularly within the US large cap blend category, where the technology sector accounts for more than 30% of sustainable portfolios.
Okay. And then finally, what can you say about regional allocations?
Yeah, so here we focused on global funds and found that active sustainable funds had a higher allocation to North American equities compared to conventional strategies, and even a slight overweight relative to the benchmark. So they also invested less in Asian equities, especially emerging Asia, which also translates into an underweighting in emerging markets. Then for passives, the allocation to North America is also above the benchmark, and both conventional and sustainable strategies have low allocations to Asia and emerging markets.
Okay, Ronald, thank you very much for your insights in these biases that we see in sustainable investing. I think some of them shall be a surprise to our viewers, maybe others not, but great insights. And thank you very much for that. And to your viewers, thank you very much for watching. For Morningstar, I'm Robert van den Oever.